Today's case is yet another case that will leave you with a pit in your stomach and in utter disbelief seeing what some people are capable of. This monster of a woman took every step possible to ensure that her disabled, helpless daughter would live in the most horrendous, disgusting, vile living conditions possible. She ignored her cries for help, she lied to everyone who expressed their concerns for her safety, and she tried to hide everything she was doing to her. This all culminated in the most disturbing, tragic end possible. But before we dive into this gruesome case, I want to say a huge thank you to Nurex for partnering with me on today's video. Nurex is a digital healthcare platform that makes it easy to get the expert healthcare that you deserve at every step of your skincare journey. You can work with Nurex licensed medical providers to get prescription strength skincare treatments at affordable prices. They can help you tackle all sorts of skin concerns like acne, breakouts, dark spots, hyperpigmentation, and smoothing out fine lines and wrinkles. They have over 50 clinically proven dermatologist treatments for all sorts of skin concerns that work much more effectively and efficiently than over-the-counter products. For example, retinoids are known as a powerhouse skincare ingredient, and Nurex offers retinoid treatments that are up to 20 times more potent than over-the-counter retinoids. But beyond that, the best part for me is that when you order with Nurex, they meet you where you're at. Skip the in-person appointment and you can do a medical consultation anytime that fits your busy schedule, day or night. You just share your skin history with a few photos, and a Nurex provider licensed in your state will review your medical history and, if appropriate, will prescribe a treatment for you. Taking control of your health starts here. Go to nurex.com/RachelShannon or use the link in the description box below to get started. That's nurx.com/RachelShannon to get started today. Results may vary, and this is not offered in every state. Medications are prescribed only if clinically appropriate and consultation is required. Thank you again so much to Nurex for partnering with me on today's video. With that being said, let's get into the case. Today, we are going to be discussing the tragic case of Debbie Leitch. Debbie Leitch was born to Elaine Clark and Thomas Leitch. Debbie was born with Down syndrome, or trisomy 21, which is a genetic condition caused by having an extra copy of chromosome 21. In general, the physical attributes of someone with Down syndrome include a flat bridge of their nose, a shorter stature, smaller hands and fingers, and almond-shaped eyes. The other effects of Down syndrome are intellectual disability, developmental delays, hypermobility, and low muscle tone. They also can suffer from various health problems such as congenital heart defects, vision or hearing loss, ear infections, and sleep apnea. Now, I want to start this video right off the bat saying that in my job working in healthcare, I work with many different children with Down syndrome and other disabilities. And let me tell you, Down syndrome is very much a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, I've seen some kids who are nonverbal. They have a lot of difficulty toilet training. They're not very active, so they're very delayed with walking and other milestones. Some are very much dependent on their caregivers for most, if not all, of their basic needs. On the other end of the spectrum, some people with Down syndrome have no trouble with language or communication. They are active and can walk, run, and play sports. They can use the bathroom on their own and cook their own food and be independent in many, if not all, of their daily activities. Of course, there is a whole lot of in between, but I'm just outlining this for you guys, mostly because there is a huge stigma when it comes to disabilities in general. Many people don't understand that even if two people do have Down syndrome, that doesn't mean they have the same exact capabilities. Everyone with Down syndrome has their own unique interests, likes and dislikes, and physical and mental abilities, just like somebody without Down syndrome. As I stated, I work with people who have disabilities in my healthcare job, so this is a topic I am very passionate about. It is very important to me that you understand that each and every individual with a disability has vastly different needs, and it truly takes people with the biggest heart and compassion to help care for the people who need a lot more care and attention than the average person. And unfortunately for Debbie, that is not what she got in her life. She didn't get a kind, caring, compassionate mother. She got the exact opposite. Now, when it comes to Debbie, as she developed, she became more independent in her mobility and physical capabilities. She could walk and get around appropriately, but she needed a caretaker to help her navigate life at home and in her community. She was able to make basic choices for herself for things that she was familiar with, such as what she wanted to do or what she wanted to eat. But when it came to more complex decisions and activities of daily living, she needed help. She required a caretaker for cooking meals, maintaining her environment, and keeping up with her hygiene. According to those who knew Debbie, she was described as a happy and loving girl. She was shy, but she was outgoing and playful once she got to know someone. She loved horses and loved brushing her long hair. She absolutely idolized her mother and wanted to be just like her. When Debbie was 5 years old, her mother and father split up. According to Thomas, her father, he tried to fight for their marriage, but they couldn't make it work, and ultimately the courts decided that Debbie and her 3 siblings would live with their mother. After that, it didn't seem like Thomas had too much involvement in Debbie's life. For the first 18 years of her life, she was living in East Sussex. Her mother, Elaine, was her registered caretaker and was receiving payments from the government to help keep up with her needs. She also had a caseworker who checked in on Debbie and helped Elaine coordinate all of her therapies and activities that she needed. In East Sussex, Debbie was getting everything she needed to be happy and healthy. In 2016, she weighed just over 140 pounds. That meant that she was slightly overweight for her age, but she was generally pretty healthy. When Debbie was 18 years old, the family moved from East Sussex to Leeds. 3 years later, in 2016, the family then moved from Leeds to Blackpool. When moving to Blackpool, the social worker working with Debbie asked Elaine if she wanted a referral for services to be transferred to Blackpool. However, Elaine denied. This meant that once they moved to Blackpool, Debbie was no longer receiving the services she required. She didn't have a caseworker or a team making sure her needs were met. Therefore, the safeguarding agencies in Blackpool were not aware of what Debbie needed. They didn't even know that Debbie had a learning disability. If they did, she would have automatically been registered into their disability register and would have automatically qualified for yearly health checkups. But, as I said, nobody was notified. It seemed that after moving homes, Debbie slipped through the cracks. People in Leeds were trying to offer help, but it was declined. So after moving, no one in Blackpool even knew that Debbie required care. I do want to note, though, that even though she wasn't getting the care she needed, she didn't have a caseworker or anything, Elaine was still registered as her caretaker and was still receiving the weekly payments. By April of 2018, it was found that Debbie was suffering from a severe skin infection. She went to the doctor for treatment, but it was found that Debbie actually had Norwegian scabies. Norwegian scabies, also referred to as crusted scabies, is a severe form of scabies that is characterized by thick patches of crusty, scaly plaques that can contain scabies mites and eggs. Many times, the mites will infest under the finger beds, causing the nails to split. It is a debilitating and very highly infectious disease, and the people most at risk for developing it are the immunocompromised, such as someone with Down syndrome. It is also associated with severe neglect. When the diagnosis was made at her general physician's office, she was referred to the hospital for intensive treatment. Treatment at the hospital seemed successful, but obviously Debbie's condition raised red flags for the hospital staff, so they made a safeguard referral to adult social services. However, it's not known what came of that call. It doesn't appear that anybody followed up. After treatment, Debbie was discharged home with a treatment plan in place, as well as a scheduled follow-up appointment with a doctor to monitor her progress. However, Debbie did not make it to that follow-up appointment. By the fall of 2018, a social services worker who was involved with one of Elaine's other children visited the home. The worker found that the conditions within the home were absolutely filthy and unlivable. At the time, the social worker also referred Debbie to adult social care to get her involved with the therapies and activities she needed. A representative tried reaching out to Elaine to get something scheduled, but they couldn't get a hold of her, so the case was closed. Starting in early 2019, some family members who visited the home became concerned regarding Debbie's condition. She was deteriorating. She had lost weight. Her skin condition was back. Her once long, flowing hair was now short and straggly. They noticed that it looked like Debbie hardly, if ever, left her room. The house also smelled of a terrible odor, and it was clear that the living conditions were poor. Family members expressed their concerns to Elaine, but once again, she just ignored them. Then, by April of 2019, Debbie's cousin Sammy visited the home. When she got there, she asked to see Debbie. Elaine said that Debbie was in her room, but wanted to be alone. Sammy went to her room anyways because she was concerned and wanted to see her. And at that time, she found that 24-year-old Debbie was in very, very poor condition. The room was dark and dirty. There was a horrible smell coming from the room. Debbie was in there just lying on her mattress, which appeared filthy. Sammy encouraged Debbie to come out of her room, which eventually she did. To Sammy's surprise, Debbie was having difficulty even just standing up and walking, which was something she never previously had trouble with. When Sammy finally saw her in the light, she noticed that Debbie's pajamas were heavily stained, dirty, and smelly. This whole sight brought Sammy to tears. She told another family member about this, who I believe was her mother and Elaine's sister. Once Elaine's sister was aware of Debbie's condition, she called Elaine and told her that if she didn't sort out Debbie's situation within the next 2 weeks, she was going to call the authorities. Of course, for the weeks that followed, Elaine assured her sister that she was going to do everything she could to help Debbie. She said that Debbie's condition was improving. She had showered, she changed clothes, and was eating much better. By June of 2019, once again, Debbie returned to the hospital with a case of scabies. At that time, she was given antibiotics and creams. By the end of the month, Elaine followed up with the doctor, saying that the treatment was working. The doctor, I guess, took her word for it, though, because he didn't actually see Debbie to confirm. If he had, he would have known that the condition wasn't getting better. She was just continuing to deteriorate. By July 26, 2019, Elaine threw a birthday party for her son. During the party, Elaine told family members, including Sammy and her mom, that Debbie was in her room and didn't want to see anyone. They didn't listen, though, and went over to Debbie's room to check on her. As soon as they went to Debbie's room, they were hit with the most appalling stench. When they looked inside, they saw dirty briefs and rotting food all over the place. Once again, Debbie was just lying on her disgusting, dirty bedsheets on her nasty old mattress. Her hair was matted and unkempt. Her skin was sore, itchy, and covered in scabs. After seeing this, Sammy confronted Elaine, telling her that if she didn't do something, Debbie was going to die. While confronting Elaine, Debbie was lying in her bed, calling out to her mother, crying in pain. Elaine just straight up ignored their concerns, saying that Debbie was fine. So Sammy and her mother left and reported this to social services. They thought about calling the authorities, but they felt bad and didn't necessarily want to get Elaine in trouble. They just felt like Debbie and her both needed help. They thought that social services would be able to handle the whole thing and make the situation better. From this report, a safeguard was sent to a physician to examine Debbie. I want to note that a safeguard concern is made when someone believes a vulnerable individual is in immediate danger of severe injury or death. If a safeguard concern is confirmed by a mandated reporter, I believe the police must become involved at that point. That's at least how it works in the UK. I had to look it up because I am a mandated reporter in the US, but I'm not sure if there are differences. But from what I've been able to tell, it looks pretty similar to the way the US does it. Either way, after this report was made, Debbie's doctor planned a visit to the home that evening. Now, I also want to note that this doctor had never actually seen Debbie before, so he wasn't aware of her prior conditions or what she had previously looked like to know if she had lost weight or if her condition changed or any of that. It's also not clear whether or not this doctor knew of her previous medical history, including the 2 visits she had for severe scabies. In preparation for this visit, Elaine took Debbie to the shower. She then dressed her in an oversized hoodie, made sure the hood was up, and took her downstairs and away from her bedroom. By the time the doctor arrived, he spoke with Elaine, who pretty much just spoke for Debbie the entire time. She told the doctor that she didn't know what her family was talking about. She mentioned that Debbie was incontinent, so she may have dirtied her briefs before the family came over, but assured the doctor that it was changed in a timely manner. She said that Debbie was clean, happy, and healthy. At the time, the doctor told Elaine that Debbie's skin looked inflamed and dry, but didn't necessarily think she had scabies. He didn't think there were any safeguarding concerns, meaning police didn't need to get involved because he didn't think she was in immediate danger, but he did arrange to come back and see Debbie in 2 weeks. A few days after that, a social services worker also followed up to see Debbie. Once they arrived, they were met with one of Debbie's sisters at the door who told the workers that they weren't allowed in. Apparently, Elaine wasn't home at the time, so the sister was the only one watching Debbie, which actually was not allowed. Debbie was never supposed to be in the care of a sibling. But despite that, the social services worker left after being denied entry. Later that same day, Elaine did call social services back, letting them know that Debbie was perfectly fine. During the call, a social worker notified Elaine that they would be visiting on August 1st. Of course, Elaine then put Debbie in the shower, cleaned up her room, and dressed her in oversized clothes before workers arrived. When the worker did arrive, they saw Debbie. She looked underweight and very skinny, but she was clean, so I guess it's good enough. Elaine also told them that she was getting treatment for her skin condition. Social workers didn't seem alarmed at that time, so they left, planning to return for another visit in 2 weeks. By August 12th, the doctor did return back to the home, but he was unable to make contact with Elaine or Debbie, so he wasn't able to see her or the condition of the home. As all of that was happening, social service workers working with Debbie's brother, who also had a disability, continued going to the home. When they would visit, they never actually saw Debbie because, again, they were there for her brother. However, they did frequently hear her crying out and screaming in her room, but when they questioned this, Elaine just told them that Debbie was seeking attention. But of course, that wasn't what was going on. Despite being seen by numerous family members, numerous healthcare workers, numerous social service workers, Debbie was suffering in silence. Concerns weren't being taken seriously. Nobody actually stepped in to ensure her safety. She continued to slip through the cracks time and time again until it was far too late. By August 29th, 2019, 999 received a call from Elaine Clark, who told the operator that her daughter had been sick the past few days. She said that she wouldn't eat or drink, and now she passed away. The operator encouraged her to go to her daughter and see if there was anything she could do to resuscitate her and save her life, but Elaine told the dispatcher that she was cold to the touch. She knew that she was dead and was well beyond help. When first responders arrived to the home, they walked into a truly disturbing scene. When they went to Debbie's room, they immediately noticed a foul odor. Inside the room, there were feces all over the floor and her bed. Her clothes were stained and smelly. Debbie was found lying in what they describe as an unnatural position in the middle of the floor, and there were maggots all around her body. Her face was completely encrusted in scabs and thick plaques. In fact, her skin was in such bad condition that her face was unrecognizable, and if they didn't know who this person was already, they would not have been able to tell that she was even a female. Her hair was falling out, and she clearly looked emaciated and frail. She had ulcers all over her body, which, if you don't know what an ulcer is, you're lucky, because it's awful. When someone is lying in any given position, you will have bony prominences that will push against your skin. When someone is lying still in the same position for too long, the pressure from those bony prominences will cause the skin to start breaking down. A stage 1 ulcer is when the skin just becomes red and irritated from the pressure. If the position is not changed after an ulcer starts to form, the skin and tissues will start breaking down, and it can go all the way down to the bone. I've seen ulcers like this, and you can literally see inside, and you can see their bone and tendons. And if you aren't careful, things like feces and other bodily fluids can get into those ulcers and cause severe infections. The most common spots for ulcers are the backs of the ankles, your sit bones, and your hip bones. Ulcers like this can happen pretty quickly if someone is immobile, so that is why at the hospital, nurses and other disciplines will come into the room and roll them and place them into various positions to prevent formation of ulcers. All of that to say, the fact that Debbie had pressure ulcers on her body means that she was lying in the exact same position without moving for hours, if not days at a time. All that to say, the fact that Debbie had pressure ulcers on her body means that she was lying in the same exact position without moving for hours, if not days at a time. In addition to the ulcers and scabs, the scabies mites had embedded themselves in her skin, bred and multiplied, causing a full-blown infestation in her skin. Again, this type of infection is something that progresses over time, so that means that nothing was done about her skin infection for weeks before it got that bad. At the scene, first responders had to remove her clothing to fully inspect her. She was wearing a soiled brief at the time, and there were maggots crawling all inside of it. When they started cutting the clothes away from her body, bits of skin went with the clothes because the filthy clothes had adhered to her body. When they turned her onto her side, there was a full-blown maggot infestation crawling all over her back. Overall, there was a rash to 30% of her body, and much of her skin literally fell off when they were moving her limbs to examine her. If that doesn't speak to the appalling, disgusting conditions Debbie lived through, I don't know what does. At that time, it was crystal clear to investigators that poor Debbie had been neglected to death. After recovering her body, she was sent off to the medical examiner for an autopsy. There, the medical examiner confirmed that she had been severely emaciated, weighing only 52 pounds at the time of her death. If you remember earlier, I said back in 2016, Debbie weighed 140 pounds. She had lost over 100 pounds in the process of this neglect. Again, she was 24 years old, and even though she was likely short for her age, given that she had Down syndrome, 52 pounds is so far below what she should have weighed. It's less than half of what she should have weighed. Of course, the medical examiner also found that she was suffering from a severe scabies infestation as well, but we already knew that. Her cause of death was determined to be the result of emaciation and neglect, combined with the overwhelming scabies infestation. In the aftermath of Debbie's disturbing death, Elaine tried to minimize her culpability, saying that she did her best to care for Debbie, but it was clear that she wasn't trying her best. In fact, she didn't try at all. She completely abandoned her and did absolutely nothing to care for her in the final weeks of her life. She left Debbie suffering for weeks, if not months, as she ignored Debbie's desperate pleas for help. Debbie lied there alone in that room as her skin was eaten away by scabies mites while slowly starving to death, sitting in a bed of her own feces, urine, and maggots. She was probably wondering why, after all these years, was she now alone? Why was her mom ignoring her? Why wouldn't she help her? In those months, Elaine knew clear as day that her daughter was deteriorating. She wasn't sick for the past few days and died from refusing to eat or drink. That level of starvation takes weeks, if not months. Elaine's culpability is shown by her family members' reports that they warned Elaine of Debbie's condition. It's shown by the fact that she would shower and dress Debbie before social workers and doctors came to examine her, because she knew damn well that Debbie was in horrible condition that would be reported if noticed by others. She took the steps to hide what she was doing to her daughter. Therefore, she knew what she was doing and knew it was wrong. It was also reported that while her daughter lay in that room slowly dying, Elaine was out there using the disability money to buy herself shoes and handbags without a care in the world. So basically, that shows that she wanted to stop caring for Elaine. She didn't want Elaine in her life anymore, but she still wanted the money that she got from having a daughter with a disability. That being said, at that time, 49-year-old Elaine Clark was arrested for the unlawful killing of her daughter. Again, she initially denied responsibility, saying that she didn't mean for this to happen, that she tried her best to care for Debbie. But by January of 2020, 10 days before this case was set to go to trial, Elaine changed her plea to guilty to gross negligence manslaughter. At her sentencing hearing, the judge spoke about how horrific the neglect suffered by Debbie was. I don't need to say it all again because you all know. She suffered so much pain and anguish in the months before her death. Even though family members tried to step in and help, nothing was done because Elaine continued taking the steps to cover for the neglect. The judge talked about how Elaine continued to minimize her responsibility all throughout this whole case, even including when she pleaded guilty. Even though she technically admitted her culpability with her plea, she still tried saying that she tried her best. But again, we know she didn't. She completely abandoned her daughter who looked up to her mother so much. She left her daughter with a disability that left her unable to care for herself. It can be overwhelming as a caretaker to have to care for someone with a disability like this, but not only did she stop caring for Debbie herself, she denied her from being helped by others. She didn't get a caseworker after she moved. She stopped having social workers help with Debbie's care. She stopped taking her to therapies and activities that not only helped Debbie thrive, but also gave Elaine a little bit of a break in having to be a 24/7 caregiver. Instead of doing those things, Elaine completely gave up on Debbie and left her to die. The charge of negligent manslaughter carries a sentence of 10 to 18 years in the UK. In the sentencing hearing, the judge considered the aggravating factors, such as the prolonged period of time in which the neglect occurred and the fact that she denied help from various family members and agencies who offered support. Mitigating factors were the fact that she pleaded guilty and that she herself had a difficult upbringing. With everything considered, the judge decided that Elaine Clark will be sentenced to 9 years and 7 months in prison, having to serve a minimum of 2/3 of her sentence before she will be considered for release. In the aftermath of this horrifying and disturbing case, of course, family members of Debbie are appalled and heartbroken. Obviously, her cousin and aunt wish they did more. At the time, they saw her condition and knew it was unacceptable, so they called social services thinking that that would be enough. They now know that their efforts were futile, and they regret not getting law enforcement involved and not stepping in to make sure more was done. Debbie's father is heartbroken at the news. Of course, I will say that it didn't seem he had any involvement in her life for almost 20 years, so I don't want to speak too much on that. I don't know the extent of his relationship with his daughter, but it does always bother me when parents who aren't there for the child come out and are upset and surprised when the other parent does something to harm the child. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion without knowing too much about the whole history of, their relationship, but he could have been there, he could have stepped in, and it seems like he didn't. That is just my opinion, and again, we don't know the full circumstances, and I don't want to take away from the fact that he is probably grieving, but in my opinion, he probably could have done more to prevent this. He probably could have offered Elaine some relief when it came to providing such round-the-clock care for a person with a disability. Again, that does not give Elaine any excuse for what she did, but I do think that the father probably could have stepped in and done a lot more than he did. Additionally, the Blackpool Safeguarding Adults Board did a review into Debbie's death where they found multiple flaws within the system that allowed Debbie to fall through the cracks. Initially, when Elaine was asked if they wanted a new case manager after moving to Blackpool, she said no, as I mentioned earlier. However, since Debbie was legally an adult, the case manager should have actually asked her, not Elaine. If it was found that Debbie couldn't legally make that decision due to her cognitive deficits, then a decision would be passed on to Elaine. But with what they knew at the time, Debbie should have been asked first, and if she didn't seem competent to answer those questions, then they should have taken the steps to ask Elaine. Then, of course, all the times the doctors and social workers missed the red flags that were flying directly in their faces, especially during one of those visits that I mentioned earlier, where the worker allowed Elaine to speak on Debbie's behalf the entire time. The Blackpool Safeguarding Board determined that they should have listened to Debbie's voice. They should have talked to her first, tried to connect with her to figure out her needs, rather than just going through her mother, because again, she was an adult. And that is a big point that I want to make here. So often, people just assume that people with disabilities can't understand what you're saying. They assume that they're not capable of conversation or of making their own decisions without even attempting to talk to them. Some people will see someone with Down syndrome and never make any attempt to understand them, and that includes healthcare workers, unfortunately. It's so frustrating to see when an adult has Down syndrome and the worker or volunteer or whoever in their life just ignores them and only speaks with their caretaker. If you take anything from this video, I just want you to give people a chance. If you know someone with Down syndrome or meet someone with Down syndrome, even if they're with a caretaker, talk to them first. Don't ignore them. Don't assume that they can't communicate, because I promise you, more times than not, you will be surprised at how much they have to say. Again, like I said earlier, this is a topic that I'm very passionate about. So if you do take anything from this video, I just want you to know that people with disabilities, intellectual, physical, whatever it might be, they're so much more capable than you will ever know, and you just need to give them a chance to prove that to you. But with that being said, that is where I'm going to end today's video. Words cannot describe just how much of a monster Elaine truly is. She left her daughter alone in a dark room to suffer for months. I hope she's having a horrible time in prison, and I hope she is being treated as the nasty, evil, subhuman trash she is. I really wish she got a longer sentence. I think she deserved a much, much longer sentence for what she put her daughter through. But all I can hope is that the 9 years and 7 months she spent in prison, that she's suffering. You guys know I could go on about this for hours, but that's all I'll say about that. But you all heard my thoughts. Now I want to know what you all think. Do you think social services and doctors could have done more? How do you think they missed all of these red flags? Do you think Elaine knowingly starved her daughter to death, or do you think she was trying to care for her and just didn't know how? Do you think the other family members could have done more, or did they do everything they could? What do you think of Elaine's sentence? Let me know everything that you think about this case down in the comments below. If you liked this video, please make sure to go ahead and leave this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime and mystery videos every single week. Don't forget to turn that notification bell on so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Make sure you follow my Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Spotify. All will be linked down below. And if you have any case suggestions, please make sure to fill out the Google form, which is also listed down below. With that, hope you guys have an amazing week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.